All right. I'm so excited to be with you today. Talk about ABA in schools. We're going to talk about collaboration. We're going to talk about roles in schools. And I'm joined with my lovely colleagues, Kristen and Delaney.
Hi,
All right,
everyone.
we're going to get started. Thanks for joining us today. All right, so my name is Autumn Bailey. I am a district success manager here at CentralReach. I used to be a special education teacher. I used the ABLES-R in my classroom, the paper version, a long time ago. And I also worked with Dr. Partington. I've worked with him since 2003. He is the author of the ABLES-R and then the co-author of the AFL. So I'm so excited to be here. And next, we're going to have Delaney.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. The intro is probably not my favorite part because it dates me more than I'd like, but I've been in education for over 18 years. I'm one of the rare ones that started in general education as a teacher. I taught middle school and elementary. I was quickly drawn to my students that needed a little bit more attention and interventions to be successful. I had a knack for just determining what did and did not make positive impacts for my students. I taught in an underprivileged area with a lot of behavior challenges. And as a new teacher, it was sink or swim. I just started looking for resources that would benefit myself and my students. I stumbled across Teaching with Love and Logic and Love and Logic, the solution for kids with special needs, and was just amazed at how quickly students' behavior changed when I changed my own behavior. That quickly led me to special education. I taught middle school for a while in special education and inclusion and a resource setting, which led me to just more behavior focus. I did teach in a self-contained setting for students with ASD and while I was working on my BCBA certification. So like most of you, ABA found me, fell into it. So I worked as a BCBA in schools and as a program specialist for the last 9 years in settings early childhood through transition before moving to my role here at CentralReach. So I'm excited to be joined by all of my fellow BCBAs, special educators, and education team members are excited to join today and look forward to sharing with you. I will pass it over to Kristen.
Hey guys, I'm Kristen Smith. I'm a senior instructional designer at CentralReach. And rounding us out, as you guys were talking, I realized we have such a wonderful collection of skills amongst the three of us that are very diverse and unique. So I've never worked as a teacher in a school. I've primarily worked as a behavior analyst. Delaney dates me like 20 years in the field, but I've mostly done in-home programming with a lot of collaboration with schools. So I've been a contractor with school districts to provide services through the district, been a part of due process and lawsuits on both sides, and just a lot of collaboration within like private ABA services in schools. And so I'm rounding us out. So you have the full spectrum of experience with the three of them, which is nice. And I think you guys will all see that today as we talk about different things. So let's move on to some housekeeping. We have got, okay, so as you notice, we have the Q&A on. We've turned off the chat. The Q&A just lets us filter. So feel free to drop questions and thoughts and ideas in there. As we go through, we are going to give you 3 secret words that will be necessary for your continuing education credits. So just write those down as we say them. And then shortly after this webinar, you'll get an email that will give you a link to put those in. So just keep them handy. For those of you not attending live, or if you're live, that'll come quick. Anybody not live will get a copy of the webinar or a link to it in the next couple of days, probably early next week, just because we're bumping into the weekend. So our learning objectives for today, you've probably already seen these if you checked out the email and agreed to come and be with us today. But we really, I think across the three of us, we really want to echo the spirit of like collaboration and what our role is and how we can work together with different school personnel. And so through that lens of collaboration, we're going to be talking about roles and responsibilities and characteristics of data collection and methods for approaching teamwork. And then I feel like we get a really unique opportunity to talk about assessment in schools because that's not often something that's done outside of a triannual evaluation. If you're already doing that, you're like ahead of the curve. This is what we're hoping to get to you out of today. Awesome. Okay. Now I'm going to pass it off to Delaney to begin talking about roles and responsibilities.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. So I just wanted to start with the trajectory of what it looks like for BCBAs in schools. We know that the number of BCBAs in the United States has vastly increased over the years. Here you can see at almost 6,000% increase since 2010. And then this is a little bit of old information from 2015, where we had approximately 7 to 12.5% of BCBAs that were employed by education. And we can see just from the trajectory of the increase in overall BCBAs, we can assume that has vastly increased since 2015 as well. Just looking at this growth, we know the job growth is expected to increase by more than 20% even in the next 8 years. That is according to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. They started tracking this in 2010, so ever since then, it has increased in our field. We are in high demand in the United States, making it a great time to be a BCBA, especially in schools as the need grows there. We know that school districts are faced with an increasing behavioral need across the country. So that comes with a demand for BCBAs that has also increased. We see schools hiring BCBAs to support students that are both with disabilities and without. So we see BCBAs working in the special education side as well as the general education side. And the job growth is staggering. So there's plenty of opportunities for aspiring BCBAs. I love to see that so many BCBAs are with us today that are also special educators. That's such a great combination of skills, especially for those working in school district. It's becoming less and less rare, which is great to have both of those. We can see that the capacity of ABA knowledge in school districts is growing, which is great to see for our field. So, like I said earlier, I have spent many days as a behavior analyst in school. That is where the bulk of my experience has been. But I'm sure, like many of you, I can positively say there isn't a typical day in the field of behavior analysis or schools in general. That makes the field both amazing and challenging at the same time. What one school BCBA day looks like can be totally different than another school BCBA. A lot of that depends on your state, your specific district or campus, and your job description or role that you're placed into with that school district or organization. But I have seen certain responsibilities that have a common theme with ABA roles in education. So typically for me, I would consult with my different classrooms, collaborate with staff. Because my role was mostly considered staff support and not a direct IEP service, there were some instances of that, but that wasn't the norm. And I know that varies by state too, whether there is direct service from ABA providers and BCBAs in schools or whether it's more of a consultative staff support type roles. It was a lot of collaborating, working with staff on how things were going, discussing which interventions have been successful, which ones haven't, and then checking in with, if you're lucky enough to have RBTs or parents and your special education teachers, just to get an update on how their caseload was going. If the student has been struggling or not, which interventions are working and which aren't. Did someone have a good day or a bad day? Let's talk about it. That could include some shadowing of staff. If the student had been struggling in music or in the general education classroom, they would ask, can you come observe? Can you offer some suggestions? While other days might have been more focused on behavioral skill training. So maybe working in the small group time or in the center to introduce and teach new skills. And staff trainings are also a very big component in the school setting. I can get a little defensive here, but others can bring up that school staff aren't quite trained. It's not the same as working in clinic where usually you're working with mostly certified staff, and that can be the case. But if you come and see all the barriers that educators are faced with, you can see that ongoing trainings are crucial. Being intentional, specific with certain groups of staff that need certain areas of focus. For instance, Behavior 101 or just functions of behavior. Often they need to know what to do in the moment. They're unsure of maybe what replacement behaviors are. It's just a lot of focusing in on exactly what that group of staff is needing at the time, as well as overarching ongoing trainings with staff that may support across campuses in that capacity too. Also, anyone that works in school knows that culture is a huge part of how schools run and what they do. So it's really important to understand just how the school culture is at each campus, or how each group vibes and gels together. That's a huge part of just being a team member. A lot of times in a self-contained setting, if you're supporting in there, there is a lot of cooks in the kitchen. There's a lot of adults working in the same room, and that can be a positive and a negative at the same time. Typically, special education teachers aren't trained in how to manage both staff and students. That's not a lot of training that happens with that during their coursework in schools. A lot of it can be team building, helping staff communicate better with each other. Sometimes you end up being a team mediator as well. When you're working on interventions for really challenging behavior and staff aren't communicating, everything falls apart. So team building is a huge part of that. I was often referred to as a team mom, trying to keep the peace while building capacity among staff to keep everything operating. So you end up mediating a lot of things while also building capacities. I'm not a fluent OBM practitioner, but a lot falls on those lines with working in structured systems and procedures. So it's a lot of listening, building rapport with staff, I feel was the most important piece while working in education. There were a lot of variables in the environment that you can't control, but ensuring that you have a well-established, positive relationship with staff that you collaborate with on a daily basis is top priority. I truly do care how their own son or daughter is feeling, how their mom's surgery went, or what they did that weekend. Those things were important to me. A lot of times in our field, we can be viewed as not being, that can be viewed as not being direct, or it can be maybe looked at as passive. But I find that kind of funny and ironic because the first thing that we talk about with our staff when training is making sure that the clients or students you're working with is that you're building that relationship, building that rapport and pairing with them. Of course, I'm going to do that with the key stakeholders and team members that are the ones that are supporting the progress of students. Making sure that is happening is very important. Also, the majority of time, functional behavior assessments fall under the responsibility of a BCBA. For some students, some schools, school psychologists conduct these as well. And then developing the behavior intervention plans based off of FBAs is a common practice and responsibility. It's the what do I do? What do I teach recipe for staff? Building those replacement skills in that FBA showed that the student needed. So a lot of direct observations, reviewing past records and data, interviewing staff, and a lot of times parents, interviewing with the student, ensuring it's just a comprehensive and thorough assessment. So an FBA can look different a little bit in the clinical world versus the school world. But in schools, you just have to be very careful. They are subject to litigation. And so you have to ensure your assessments are legally defensible. Not that clinic FBAs are not, but you just want to make sure that you're always looking through it with that lens on. Collaboration, consultation. You do have some supervision if you're lucky enough to have RBTs in there. And like I said, there is sometimes that direct service can be part of the student's AP service minutes too. We also have to consider the ethical guidelines in schools as well. It can be a tricky subject, and there's still a lot of areas that could be researched as well, since we are seeing such an influx of BCBAs and the ABA practice and interventions in schools. And then we also have to acknowledge what limitations that could jeopardize our certification. And that goes along with the ethical guidelines that we have to consider while in schools. It looks a lot different. So making sure that any of the supervisors and administrative staff above BCBAs, that everyone is aware of those ethical guidelines so that we are following them in that setting too. Okay, next slide. Here, we want to talk about what BCBAs don't do. Like I said, roles vary greatly between district to district, state to state, and school to school. But there are a lot of things that are left up to other team members. So it's rare that you will be given the job to create curriculum, specifically following state standards. That is usually in the wheelhouse of the special education teacher and team. They're usually collaborating with gen ed teachers as well. They definitely might ask for your input, especially when it comes to writing IEP goals. You can definitely collaborate in that aspect, and I did many times. Case managing IEPs is left up to special educators as well. But again, we're collaborating there too, especially as an SBA and a is being presented during IEP meetings during that time. That's definitely something you're going to collaborate on. And we want to make sure that we're not practicing out of our scope. Even though I have a background of being in schools, moving into the staff support role as a BCBA, there were times that I did feel like I needed to reach out to mentors that had a little bit more experience in, say, self-injurious behaviors is an instance that I think of. And so really making sure that we are leaning on other professionals that have the most experience in that area so that we are getting to progress with our students in the fastest route possible. Creating behavior change programs without considering physical and mental health issues is not something we would do. We always want to first consider and rule out any physical or mental health issues before moving forward with any interventions, support, or assessments with our students. And then if you have been working in schools, you know that we do not contain a magic fairy dust solution just by walking into the classroom. Sometimes I felt like either school administrators or school staff felt like as long as, the BCBA was here, that we could step back and everything would be solved. And we know that's not the case. We don't have the magic solution, especially without consultating and collaborating with all team members involved, getting to the root of the issue and making sure that we have all the data to make informed decisions. Just checking off that box of hiring a BCBA and having one enter the building is not going to directly make things magically better and improve in that sense. Okay, next slide. If you are lucky enough to have RBTs on staff with you in a school setting, you're one of the lucky ones. And just like an increase that we're seeing in BCBAs in the school setting, we're seeing that for RBTs as well. It would be nice if we all came as a package deal ourselves with 2 RBTs in tow. That would be great. So this can be subbed out with paraprofessional roles as well. Hopefully in the future, we have more training for our support staff, including RBT certifications. But there are a lot of RBTs working in school, which is amazing. RBTs are doing a lot of what paras do, but they're making sure they follow plans with their BCBA oversight. They are taking data, sharing that with their BCBA and staff that they work with. So they are also working with other staff members as well. They are collaborating with the special education teacher, with the SLP, with the OT, and possibly the school psychologist as well, with gen ed teachers, with the PE and music and art teacher. It takes a whole collaboration among everyone for the success of that student. They're also supporting curriculum, working on skill-based training and IEP goals typically as well. So what they don't do and what paras don't do is create curriculum, manage changes to the behavior plans or curriculum or any programming that is in the student's IEP plan. They do not provide ABA interventions for students that has not been assigned to or that they have not been trained on. And they typically are not asked to have direct conversations about student details with parents or other staff members that don't have that direct relationship with the student that they've been assigned to work with. Those can be interchanged with paras as well. Next, so talking about when an RBT might be of benefit or show value for hiring specifically someone with that RBT certification. Typically, an IEP team would get together or there would be some sort of staff meeting among the team members where they conclude that the student's behaviors are complex enough that it would require services with that certification, that they would need someone with them that has been trained specifically in ABA interventions and that could carry those out effectively. Additionally, a student specified in the IEP demand a higher level of behavioral support than maybe just support staff that have not had training. And in general, you want to make sure that factors such as physical aggression or progress tracking alone or implementing behavior analytic strategies just in isolation, those are not sufficient reasons to require a one-on-one. There's adequate research out there that shows that those practices can be implemented among staff that has had training. It doesn't necessarily have to have the technical training of an RBT, but it definitely is a case-by-case basis and needs to be evaluated among a team for that decision to happen. Next is, we know that, like I said, culture is very important. Understanding the culture of the school, the staff that you're working with is very important. And that is because we know that building teacher capacity is not a one-time event. You want to have that culture of learning and innovation in the school that you're working in. You want to foster that culture by creating a safe and supportive environment where teachers can kind of trial interventions, where they feel comfortable sharing their ideas, where they feel comfortable learning from one another, being able to talk about, hey, this really worked great for me today. I wanted to share this with you. Or, hey, I saw the data showed when they're in this group with this staff member, the behavior is really going down. Can you talk to me about what you're doing? Because when we're in this environment or with this staff member, we're seeing a spike in behavior. So I just really talk about what are some of the things you're doing. So just having that open conversation, like I said, being the team counselor, being able to foster that environment where everyone feels comfortable sharing and expanding, just making that commitment to growth and learning. Having BCBAs in schools, having that support staff that you have to collaborate with, including all the team members, making sure you have those sessions set up so that it just becomes part of the day-to-day routine for staff, is that we just have time to sit down and collaborate. I know time is extremely valuable, but finding a way to make that a priority is going to pay off in the end. We know that staff is going to be tired one way or the other. Are they going to be putting that effort into dealing with problem behaviors without working on things proactively as a team? Or are we going to put that effort into being proactive and working on those interventions so that it leads to more improved outcomes for our students? Are we modeling all the things that we're putting in place? Are we trying new things and fostering a place where we can try different things and look at the data to continue and generalize those to different students and different staff members as well? We know the possibilities are endless for our students and for our staff, especially with PD. There's so many things that we can train on. So the possibilities are endless there. All right, we're on to our secret word. First one is collaboration. Make sure you write that down. All right, Kristen, I'll pass it over to you.
I feel like we're going for more. Possibilities are endless. As BCBAs, we have such opportunity. That was my first sentence I wrote down when I was thinking about how we can talk about implementing behavior analysis in schools. And the possibilities really are endless. And we do have so much opportunity because this is where our learners, they spend the majority of their day at school. And so when we're actively providing services in this context, we really have this unique occasion to be a really integral part of their daily lives beyond what we normally are afforded in clinic and home-based settings. So when we are working in public schools, we are really provided with this rich learning environment. And this setting really allows us to employ a really wide variety of evidence-based practices that are tailored to meet our learners' needs. And I think, Delaney, you said it in a different way, but schools are really their own unique ecosystem, right? It is just a different beast being in a school. And the expectations, the culture, the legal requirements, and generally the way things are done are just so much different than what we would expect in home or clinic-based services. And everybody knows this, but I'm just going to say it. When we are in a clinic or home-based services, we are building a context for our learner. That environment is so carefully curated. We just build it around them, right? But in schools, by the nature of it, we are taking our learner and we are putting them into a context that already exists. And certainly we can tailor that context to an extent for our learner, but we are by no means building a context for them. And that's actually a beautiful thing because life is not curated. Life cannot be controlled. There will be times fire alarms will go off. There will be times we just have to do things because there's no other option for us, right? And I think also that one of the most significant differences, as I'm going to move through and talk about some things, is the ratio of learners to teachers, right? And that's really, I think, part of the crux of why we cannot and should not try to replicate what we do in home programming in schools. So I'm going to move through some methods and suggestions for provide you with some frameworks. I'm going to talk about data collection a little bit. But this whole spirit, especially, I think of the webinar globally, but what I'm really going to try to hit home is around this idea of opportunity and collaboration and really getting a thorough understanding of the different players in the school. And I don't mean like players in general, like for your specific learner and within their specific school context. And all of this information today is brought to you not only from research and evidence, but also by a lot of missteps that I've made in my career and things that I've learned, not as rule governed behavior, but as contingency shaped behavior. And I'll be forever grateful over the course of 20 years for the teachers who helped gently and sometimes not so gently teach me about really the best and most effective way to be providing behavioral services in a school. Okay, and I love communication in the Q&A, so I'm going to go through these frameworks. If you've been to my webinars or heard me talk before, you know that I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I love giving you like a million frameworks for how to just organize your brain and think through it. So I'd love if there's things that pique your interest and you want to hear more about them in the future in blogs or webinars, or you have any thoughts, just drop those in the Q&A. Okay, so here is our general approach when we are thinking about beginning to deliver or continuing to deliver intervention in school settings. And again, when we are thinking about learners, we are taking them and we are putting them in the school context. So there's a couple things we need to remember. Number one, that's it, that we do not control the whole environment. And it is not our role, our job, or our place to try and establish extreme control over that environment. But the other thing we need to remember is that the learner is our client. The school is our funder. It's a little bit weird because like when we're providing in-clinic services, our funder is not the place where we're providing the services. But ultimately, our learner is our client. And when we take that mind frame, I think it helps alleviate some of the burden of those ethical issues we can get a little bit sticky with, like Delaney was talking about. I feel like that could be its whole own other webinar, the ethic. But when we're looking at this, we're really wanting to think about starting off and having a constructional approach to how we deliver intervention in the school. And when I'm talking about taking a constructional approach, I am talking about the way that Israel Gold-Diamond initially talked about it. If you haven't read his work or learned about constructional approaches to behavior analysis, I highly recommend you do. It'll be in our references. It's inspiring. But basically, this is where we are focusing on building skill repertoires. So we're working less on eliminating and more on building. And this is really where our focus is. We build skills that are needed for our learners to be in their least restrictive environments and access education and peers and all these different amazing opportunities and instructional arrangements. And we select skills in the IEP that we all legally have to work on that functionally meet the needs of our learners. And the reason I put this first is I think this is where we as BCBAs contribute something to the team that a lot of other players on the team don't. And that's partially because of just our role as behavior analysts and what we're taught in our schooling. Delaney, I wrote down, you said, thinking about school staff as like being trained to do things. They're trained to do a very robust other set of things. But it's not like they go to school and take a class on Israel Gold-Diamond, right? When we think about this, we can think about it specifically with FBAs and behavior support, or in Washington, we call them behavior intervention plans, where we're making sure that when we are suggesting and completing those plans and identifying skills that need to be built, that we have a one-to-one correspondence between that being in a BIP or a behavior intervention plan and that being in an IEP. So again, we are all required to work on it. It's not just something that we're working on. It's something that we have to work on and show progress on. Social validity. So again, these are not things in terms of our clients. These are things in terms of our culture, like you were talking about, Delaney. So the social validity of the procedures we have in place with the paraeducators, the teachers, the administrators, and the learner themselves. Then we have data collection. And if you know me at all, you know I am like the biggest data nerd. I love talking about it. I love anything that has to do with data collection. In schools, that can get a bit tricky. And it's just so different than one-on-one intervention where we can just tally, we can collect all the data in the world and analyze it and make all these decisions. And again, it's because this environment is uncontrolled. We have a vast landscape of learning opportunities and things we're doing. So we have the opportunity to play around with the ways that we are collecting data and be very purposeful in our measurement and those levels of measurement we choose, the meta, macro, meso, and micro data, and choose what works for us in the context of the schools. I can't tell you how many times I have recommended data collection that completely failed because it was not for the school context. So choosing data collection that is appropriate for the context and the people collecting data. Bringing precision. in our language. So we're sticklers. I love it about our field. We are so sticklers about verbal behavior and making sure things are described clearly and accurately. And we can bring that to the IEP team. That is not something that is often a strong suit of all the members on the team. And as Delaney said, we often have a room where we've got a special ed teacher, a paraeducator, a general education teacher, an OT, an SLP, you name it, and they're on the team. And we need to be able to all be talking about the same thing in the same way. And we have the opportunity to bring that precision. We can also focus on pivotal behavior when we are modeling or shaping the behavior, not of our learners, but of the staff members in the school that we are working with. Choose behaviors that'll give us the biggest bang for our buck, right? We want to see the most robust changes in that teaching staff in the ways that we can. And then finally, number 6, and I think I put it on this wheel, but technically it's more of an outcome of these other 5 things, is staff ownership over the systems that we're putting in place. We really want to see staff taking ownership, implementing what we have, tweaking it to fit their context, and taking it over from us. And that lets us know we've done our job. Okay, so next slide, we have instructional design. This is an area that is a passion area of mine. Obviously, I'm an instructional designer at CentralReach. These are the 5 components to instructional design. And in clinic and home programming, we do these pretty well, right? They're pretty distributed, partially because our funders require them, and partially because we have more time and resources. In school settings, we often live in this implementation and procedure design place, and we need to pull back on both of them. And so for the sake of time, I'm just going to go a little more quickly through this, but you can use these as a checklist to see where are you doing this? If there's an IEP goal, are you pulling it out and creating a scope and sequence to make sure that instruction is being sequenced for the learner and we're not just taking the goal and working on it? And so these can be really helpful. And on the next slide, we have a check. This is also like similar to a checklist of things you can do for that scope and sequence and element compound analysis to think about skills your learner may need. Because those IEP goals are written for 12 months. So while there may be an exception where we can pull it out and work on it, often we need to be more sequential in our instructional design to get the learner from where they are now, demonstrating that skill across contexts. Okay. So now I want to move on to talking about what is valuable. We've talked about these foundational aspects of that, the wheel of those 6 things, and then instructional design. But we also need to focus on the collaborative relationship, because at the end of the day, if no one likes us, unless they're forced to do it, they're not going to do what we ask. And so, Delaney, I feel like you hit it so well when you were talking about just having a good relationship and then finding out what is valuable to the people that you're working with in the school and aligning with it. So again, this is almost like a checklist of things that we can do for each of these players. I didn't put para-educator on here. They're so important. They should have been on here. That was a total oversight on my part. But we want to look at each of these people or things and make sure that we're aligned. So ultimately, compliance is important. We need to make sure that we're legally and ethically in line with what we need to do. But then we need to be looking at our learners, teachers, and administrators and seeing what actually is valuable to them. Not just what do I think is valuable to them. But if I sat down with the teacher and I said, hey, I think that in your class, you prefer when the class is actively engaged in the lesson. You're okay if it's not quiet. You want them raising their hand and excited in the room, and that's a value of yours. Is that true? Would the teacher say yes or no? We don't want to put it on them. We actually want to hear from them what these different things are. The barriers piece is really important because, as Delaney touched on, we have so much continuity in our parts, but barriers can often be outside of the teacher's control. Sometimes they're within the teacher's control, but sometimes they're. And so being able to catalog what those are and address them as possible is really critical. And that's where the administrator comes in. So in my experience, whenever I'm in a school, the first thing I do is become BFFs with that administrator, because ultimately they are the center of the wheel of the school. And they are the one who's making the decisions about how resources are allocated, what additional resources are needed. They're the touch point for the teachers. And having a strong relationship with the administrator is really critical in when you need barriers addressed, whether that's with a teacher, whether that's something you need alleviated for a teacher, right? That administrator is going to be critical. And again, knowing what their vision is for the school, their values, their priorities in terms of relationships with the teacher. These are all really important. And you can do these in 5-minute conversations over weeks, right? We can figure these things out and just catalog them. Okay, I'm going to skip over this slide. This was intended to show you that we have so many rich opportunities for different types of instruction. We're not limited like we are in home programs to just one-on-one instruction at a table, or maybe we can pull in another client to do social interaction. We have direct instruction, large groups, small groups, so many opportunities. I have a table that I created, and if you use our product Lifted, you know already that there is a beautiful dashboard that takes half this work away from you. If you don't use it, you should see that it's beautiful. But what I would suggest when you're in a school is to be really methodical in how you approach and collect these data from the different frameworks I've shown you. When I was in schools, I would create a table like this for each learner and catalog the skills, whether it was in an IEP, so telling me whether I legally need to report on it or not, and then talk about the instructional arrangements and the data being collected and some of the barriers to instruction. You can see here for raising hand, the first one, and for washing hands, the barrier for progress on these two are teachers are over prompting. So now that lets me be very purposeful when I go in and get that pivotal behavior when I'm coaching to give the teacher strategies around providing more time or providing clearer expectations, right? So I'll address two skills with one coaching session by working on these types of things, rather than going through and saying, I'm working on raising hand. Here are the 3 things I'm going to teach the staff. I'm working on washing hands. Here's the 2 things I'm going to teach them. So just being very methodical in how you approach the staff is critical. And using, again, a table like this is perfect. I'm going to skip over this slide for the sake of time. And I just really wanted to do a quick plug for the levels of data. Because as I showed you in that wheel earlier, in home programming, we address all 4 of these levels of measurement. We have content available via webinars and courses in CR Institute around these levels of measurement. If you're not familiar with them, I highly recommend looking up those courses. Dr. Tim Fuller and I have created a few of them. They're amazing and they're really insightful. So in schools, we're good at these first couple of tiers, but I think when we get to the macro data, when we're looking at assessments, this is often where we fall out and either silo ourselves or don't do it. And so that kind of leads us into some things that Autumn's going to talk about now.
All right, so we're going to move into essential elements. We talked about the roles within the special education team and how ABA methods in the school. We're going to move into essential elements for learning. What are essential pieces that need to be added so the learner will be able to acquire as many skills as possible? Kristen talked about all those skills that they need within the classroom. So no matter the age of the learner, if you're working with a preschooler, a teenager, an adult, they need to learn a new skill. Those motivational factors and those learning processes, they're all still the same. The assessor and the intervention team need to determine how to motivate that learner, what gets them motivated to participate, choose which skills are important to teach, like Kristen talked about, arrange for sufficient opportunities to engage and learn, and then apply those skills across the settings and instructors for the generalization. Teaching strategies should consider the age of the individual's current abilities that they have and that they are using at this moment, and then the current priorities and the needs of that specific individual. They all need different types of things, and so we need to make sure that we're considering all of those different elements. So essential elements, the process, we want to identify and track the skills so we know which skills are important to work on, obviously. What assessments are we using to create these goals? How are we tracking these skills? We need to prioritize the objectives, which skills are super important for the student at this very moment in time. We want to have active engagement for the learner and their motivation, what motivates them to learn. How can we get the student motivated to learn all those skills that they need to learn within that year? Trends to mastery, how many trials are needed for this student to learn this specific skill? How many days per week? How many hours per day? We need to know these things before we move on. Various learning environments and instructors. The student needs to know the skill in the classroom, at home, in the community, all different types of environments with the teacher, with the paraprofessional, with the RBT and the BCBA. They need to do all of these skills with all different types of instructors. Also, the parents. So the skill can be generalized and used in all different kinds of environments and different people. We want the parents are in our quarter every time so that we're all on the same page. We're teaching the same skills, and so the student can learn quicker and generalize those skills as well at school and at home. And we are on secret word number 2, which is method. Make sure to write this down so you have it later. Secret word number 2 is method. Okay, so working better together, we want to talk about working together as a team approach to ensure that students have the best access to resources and supports that they need to be the most successful in school and in their life. We know that collaborating with others, we talked about this before, it requires effective communication and interactions with others. But having those meetings all the time with the colleagues about every single student can take a lot of time. We need that, but it does take a lot of time. So we have some super helpful tools that we're going to go over. It might make collaboration a little faster. That's the point of these tools. So you can collaborate quicker with all the people that you're working with. So the first step for any process in special education to go smoothly is to collaborate with your team members. Who does your student work with in school? Will these other professionals make their own goals for the student? Are you making separate goals? Or are you collaborating together to make consistent goals throughout the year? Are you getting a full picture of the student's skill level and progress that was made from the previous year from different team members? Have you consulted the parents to get their opinion on what goals will be great for the student and their family dynamic? It's so important to gather all the information, collaborate with anyone who's involved with your student. From other teachers, maybe that student is pushed into general education, you need their input. Other professionals, the FRP, the OT, the PE teacher. I consulted with the PE teacher a lot for gross motor skills goals. The BCBA, obviously, and the psychologist. If any of these professionals work with your student, it's so important to collaborate with them on goals so everyone who works with that student is on the same page. The paraprofessionals or RBTs that Delaney was talking about, if they're working directly with the student, one-on-one or 1-to-2 with the student, what's their opinion on how the goals are going, how those skills are going, what goals need to be considered, do they think? Also, parents are an integral part of the team. The parents will be with the student long after the student leaves the classroom. So that family dynamic may lead to discussions on which goals are most important for them to add to the IEP. We recommend gathering those possible IEP goals that you have considered with the other staff and then showing it to parents well before the IEP is completed. So that way you can get valuable input with everybody before that IEP is finalized. And also it minimizes surprises when you go into that meeting. In some instances, the student can advocate for themselves on which goals they'd like to work on. This is especially true for the AFL goals, the functional skills, if they're interested in learning them and moving towards maybe an employment for the future. So each person in the student's life has that unique perspective on what could be included for the student to achieve their best possible outcome. If they're woven together in a very seamless way, the possibilities can be endless for these students. I used to have those in-person meetings and pass that paper protocol back and forth between team members. Can you fill out this part? But since I have the most experience with the ABLES-R and the AFLs, I'd love to talk about these assessments. Now in CR assessments, they're combined together, and there's this option to have an additional assessor. It allows the primary assessor to assign specific parts out. For example, if I'm interested in knowing nighttime routines, if they're coming in so tired in the morning and I'm wondering what is going on with their nighttime routine, I can send that skill category just to the parent or the caregiver at home to see what those nighttime routines look like. If I want to have the SLP just work on a COEX, I can just assign that specific skill content area to the SLP to see what they think their COEX look like. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about tailored software to support collaboration in the classroom. We have now the ABLES-R and the AFLs that's combined. One thing that continues to come up in conversations in CentralReach, as well as in the special education community, is that need for a battery of assessments that allows us to know who the student is, what are their unique needs, what skills are super essential for them at that moment of assessment, what can we target for intervention or teaching? So these unique individuals that we work with aren't just these boxes all colored in. They're these beautiful mix of experiences and opportunities and abilities. And so the ABLES-R and the AFLs combined together now allows this framework for assessment and decision making to take into account their strengths, their weaknesses, and then have that plan for their unique needs as well as collaborate seamlessly with others, like I'm going to show you now. I talked about before the additional assessor option that I mentioned earlier. This kiddo, we just pulled in the ABLES-R. As you can see, this basic language of learning is the ABLES-R, and then the basic living skills within the AFLs. For this kiddo, we pulled in the 2 protocols. They're just using those 2 protocols with them. And if I wanted to work with the SLP, let's say, and I wanted to just assign this ACOICS or vocal imitation section with the SLP, I can click this button, send it to the SLP and with their email address, and they will just see that vocal imitation skill content area. So they can just score that specific skill content area. I'll get that information back and I can see what their opinion is about that specific category. The same time that we were talking about with the parents or the caregivers, if you want to send them nighttime routines, you can do that. With the BCBA, I know there's tons of BCBAs on this call. If you want to just know that self-management section in the AFL, you definitely can do that. So it's really nice for just showing one skill content area at a time if you want to share it with someone else and get their opinion. And now I'm going to pass it over to Delaney. She's going to talk about some other tools that we do have in CentralReach that we can use for collaboration as well.
So not only in our CR assessments platform can you collaborate, but in moving towards after you have those target objectives identified, after you do an assessment, you've created goals for your student based on that, and you're starting your tracking session. CR Lifted is a great tool for that. We can import your IEPs directly from your IEP management system. And then within there, you can collaborate on goal tracking with all of your team members. It can be shared. You can have your SLP, your OT, you can have administrators in there, any of your BCBAs, multiple teachers if you have multiple special education teachers or gen ed teachers that are taking data. They all can get in and take data on the same goals and have it live in one platform for analyzing, for reporting on, for progress reporting, for IEP recording purposes. So it's a great tool. It can be shared. Reports can be shared with parents as well. So you have that full circle of collaboration from assessment through goal creation into data tracking. There's also a few other tools that we have as well that you can collaborate on. But I just wanted to mention these 2 specifically since we're talking about whole teams here and being able to share information and data tracking sources between team members for particular student progress.
Thank you, Delaney. All right, so we have our secret word number 3, which is assess. Secret word number 3 is assess. And now I think we're going to go over a couple questions that we have in our Q&A. I know that Kristen, you wanted to answer some live.
Or, yeah, I think they'd be great to answer live. Delaney, I think this one would be great for you. If we have somebody who's in school providing support and they're a para-educator and they're also an RBT, how do you determine which role they're acting in if they're assigned to a single student all day? Or do you differentiate these roles?
I think that's a great question. And I don't think there's one single right answer for that. I think that's something that's very common for someone that is an RBT to maybe their job role is labeled as a paraeducator. It really depends on the responsibilities that are passed to the RBT. Is it a situation like we talked about earlier where it was deemed necessary that someone would need that sort of specific training and credentials to work with that student? Are they having severe enough behaviors that it was deemed a specific program on targeting those reduction of behaviors and an increase in replacement behaviors for that where an RBT would be deemed necessary? But there's lots of paraeducators that have their RBT certification that are supporting multiple students, and it's not necessarily a specific assignment for an RBT. And it also would be interesting to know, are they looking to maintain their certification as an RBT? Are they being supervised sufficiently by a BCBA in order to maintain their certification? Making sure all of those things are in place for them to maintain their certification, and then just determining at what capacity and background and training is required for the role that they've been given, the role and responsibilities.
And just
Hopefully that
another
answers.
I saw a couple Washington people in here too, and you all know state by state with our licensure requirements, that's where you really need to be looking at that too. What do they need to have to maintain their license to be whatever credential you have at that level? I think that's important because they're not always the same.
Yeah, good point. I see another question on here. Do we want to answer it live?
Sure.
Here it says, the questions, any suggestions to help the staff change their thinking? Eliminating behaviors is more important than building the skills. Great question. I don't think that's an uncommon challenge in schools. It is reinforcing to adults to have challenging behavior be eliminated. So it's typically what is focused on the most. But something that I used to really reiterate over and over to my staff and teachers is, when you are eliminating behavior, and only working on diminishing it, you're teaching students what not to do. You have to make sure you are, in retrospect, teaching them what they should do so that you don't have other problem behaviors that pop up as replacement instead of positive skill building and effective, maybe functional communication type replacement skills in its place of the problem behavior. So good point to really drive home for your staff as well.
Yeah. And if I could add to that, one thing I would think about doing is talking to the teacher about why they want to eliminate it. Is it because the behavior is disruptive and when they're trying to present a group lesson, they're not able to get through their lesson plan? Or is it because it's dangerous for other students or just annoying? Why is that? And then really meeting with them and having them help build a plan to teach those alternative behaviors and maybe mitigate some of what the behavior they're looking to eliminate is, that burden or how that's presenting as a barrier in the classroom. And then also what to expect. Once we implement a plan, it's not like Delaney said, we walk in and with the magic pixie dust and all of a sudden the behavior is gone and a new behavior is taught. That'll take time. So I think the more they can be involved and take ownership of that process, the better. But then also just taking their perspective, because sometimes it really is that they just they can't manage that behavior and be in the classroom, and they might need support with it.
Move on to the enrollment. As a reminder, immediately after this webinar, all attendees will receive an email with CEU instructions. The instructions will include a link to the course in CR Institute where you can enter those 3 secret words that we went over to complete your attendance verification. So look out for that email once we have closed the webinar.
And we see there's a few additional questions. We're over time, but we will follow up with an email answering these questions that we'll send out to everyone anonymously. We won't put your name by it if you asked it, but we will be following up.